I knew something was wrong the moment she looked at me. Her eyes didn't soften the way they used to when I walked into a room. Instead, she sat at the small table near the window and said, in a quiet but sharp voice, "Dad, can you wait outside?" At first, I thought I heard her wrong. I even leaned in, trying to read her expression. But she didn't blink. She didn't smile. She didn't even try to explain why. She just looked at me like my presence bothered her. I had been excited for that dinner. I spent most of the afternoon choosing a clean shirt, pressing the collar down, even though my hands aren't as steady as they once were. I walked into that restaurant with the kind of hope only a parent knows, the hope that time together might fix some of the distance that had been growing between us. But her voice cut through all of that. "You're making me uncomfortable," she said, and my chest tightened in a way I couldn't hide. I stepped back because I didn't know what else to do. The waiter glanced at me, confused, then looked at her as if searching for permission to speak. She didn't give him any. She kept staring at me until I walked toward the door. When I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face and made everything feel sharper. I stood there, not wanting to walk away, not wanting to make a scene, not wanting anyone passing by to know that my own daughter had asked me to leave her table. I stood still because moving felt like admitting something had broken. Through the window, I could see her talking to the waiter. She gestured toward the menu and spoke to him like she was alone, not like I was her father, not like I had raised her through scraped knees, school concerts, and every small worry she ever brought home. She didn't look toward the window once, even though she knew I was right there. She kept her focus on the table as if pretending I didn't exist made things easier for her. I couldn't stop remembering the nights we used to sit across from each other in our small kitchen, sharing simple meals and simple stories. She always asked about my day then. She used to care how I felt, what I thought, where I had been. Back then, dinner was never just food. It was connection. It was family. It was something I thought would never slip away. Standing outside that restaurant, I realized I had been wrong about that. She spoke to the waiter again, this time leaning in slightly, and I noticed something else, a hint of impatience, like she was waiting for something to happen. Then she said something I could read through the glass. "I'll handle the paperwork soon." It startled me because I had no idea what she meant. I hadn't given her anything to handle, and she hadn't mentioned paperwork in any recent conversation. The way she said it made my stomach twist, like she was planning something without telling me. People passed by on the sidewalk, each of them seeing an older man standing alone outside a warm restaurant, a man waiting for someone who didn't seem to want him there. I kept my hands in my pockets to hide how tight they had curled. I didn't want anyone to see the humiliation sitting in my shoulders or the heartbreak pressing against my ribs. I stayed quiet because I didn't know how to make sense of what had just happened. Inside, she paid the bill quickly and walked out without looking at me. She didn't ask if I'd eaten. She didn't apologize. She didn't even slow down. She walked straight to her car, got inside and shut the door. I stood there until her headlights faded into the night, because part of me hoped she would turn back, but she never did. And I walked home trying to understand how a dinner meant to bring us closer ended with me standing outside, waiting for her to drive away. Have you ever been told to leave by someone you raised with love? She started coming by more often after that night at the restaurant, but the visits didn't feel like visits. They felt like check-ins, inspections. She walked through my front door with a tone I had never heard from her before. Tight, clipped, almost like she was bracing herself for a mess she expected to find. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't sit down or let the room breathe. She scanned everything as if she had a list only she could see. The first thing she did was pick up my coffee mug and frown at the way it sat near the edge of the counter. "You shouldn't leave things like this," she said. "It's unsafe." I tried to tell her I had just finished drinking from it, but she didn't listen. She moved it to a different spot like she was correcting a mistake I didn't know I'd made. Then she wiped the counter as if my touch wasn't clean enough. Every visit after that followed the same pattern. She walked in, looked around, sighed quietly, and rearranged something. A chair, my medicine, the stack of mail I always kept near the window. She moved things without asking because she believed she should. She kept saying it was for my safety, but every adjustment felt like another reminder that she no longer trusted me with my own life. One afternoon, I went outside to check the mailbox and found my neighbor, Mrs. Willis, giving me a strange, sympathetic look. She asked if I was feeling better and said my daughter told her I'd been struggling to manage myself lately. I froze. Struggling? I asked what exactly she meant, but Mrs. Willis just patted my arm gently and said she hoped things got easier. I stood there in the sunlight, feeling something cold settle in my chest. I hadn't been struggling. I'd been alone. There's a difference. A few days later, I noticed my phone hadn't rung all morning, which seemed unusual. When I checked it, I realized several calls had gone straight to voicemail without ringing. When I asked my daughter about it, she said she had adjusted some settings to protect my peace. She said too many calls could overwhelm me. I didn't understand how she decided that on her own, or why I suddenly needed someone to intervene in simple things like a phone ringing. But she said it with a tone that closed the conversation before it started. She came with her partner the following weekend. He shook my hand politely, but with a look that was far too familiar, clinical, assessing, like he was taking mental notes. She introduced him as someone who helps older adults stay organized. The phrase lodged itself uncomfortably in my mind. Older adults, organized, as if she had already placed me in a category I never agreed to join. He asked questions about my bills, my routines, my schedule. I tried to answer plainly, but every time I did, my daughter would correct me in small ways. "He forgets sometimes," she'd say, even when I hadn't forgotten anything. He nodded each time she spoke, and I could see him forming an opinion of me based on her words instead of my own. Then I started noticing something troubling. Mail arriving later than usual, small envelopes missing, flyers tucked into strange corners of the porch. One evening, I found a notice about an insurance update that was dated weeks earlier. I knew I hadn't seen it before. When I asked my daughter about it, she said, "Oh, that must have been mixed in with junk mail. Don't worry, I look through those things when I'm here." She said it so casually that it took a full minute for me to understand. She had been sorting my mail without telling me. It was a slow shift, almost invisible at first, but every moment piled on top of the last. Every corrected habit, every moved object, every screened call, every comment whispered to the neighbors, every delayed envelope. By the time I saw it clearly, the pattern had already formed. She wasn't visiting to spend time with me. She was visiting to manage me, and for the first time, I felt her eyes on me, not as a daughter looking at her father, but as someone studying a burden she wasn't sure she wanted to carry. I first noticed the change in the mail on a quiet Wednesday morning. A thick envelope from the bank sat on the table like it had been waiting for me to open it. I hadn't requested anything, so I assumed it was another one of those generic notices they send out. But when I tore it open, something inside me tightened. The letter said my recent account updates were now active, updates I had never made, permissions I had never discussed. I read the words 3 times, hoping they would change if I stared at them long enough. When my daughter came by later that day, I showed her the envelope and asked what it meant. She barely glanced at it before saying, "Dad, we talked about this. You approved it last month." Her voice held the same certainty she used when talking to waiters or mechanics, like she expected no disagreement. But I had no memory of that conversation, and I know my own mind better than anyone. I tried to tell her I would remember signing something so important, but she brushed my concern aside with a soft smile that felt more like a dismissal than comfort. Later that evening, I went to grab my checkbook from the drawer where I always kept it. The drawer was locked. I don't own a key for it because it had never been locked in the first place. I tugged on it once, twice, then stepped back, feeling a cold unease crawl into my stomach. I looked around the house, wondering how many things had been moved without me noticing. The next time her partner visited, he didn't bother pretending he was just there to say hello. He looked around with quiet interest, asking casual questions that felt anything but casual. "Have you considered consolidating your accounts?" he asked at one point, as if he knew exactly how many I had. "It's easier for families to manage things that way." Families. I knew he meant my daughter, not me. His tone was polite, but the intent behind it felt like a hand reaching into a place that didn't belong to him. After that day, I started writing things down. Dates, times, what they said, what I found, moved, what I lost track of. I kept the notes small and hidden, tucked inside an old book on the shelf no one touched. I didn't want to believe I needed to do something like that, but something deep inside me insisted that memory alone wouldn't protect me. A few weeks later, another envelope arrived from the bank, this time with an updated balance. I knew exactly what should have been in that account. I've always been careful with money, but the numbers were off. Not by much, just enough to raise the hairs on my arms. A small withdrawal here, a transfer there. Someone was testing the limits. Someone was seeing what they could move before I noticed. I brought it up gently when my daughter came the next day, but she sighed like I was burdening her. "We went over this already," she said. "You're just stressed. Let me handle it." Her partner nodded beside her, like he had authority in the matter. I watched them both, and for the first time, I saw something I hadn't wanted to see, a quiet understanding between them that didn't include me. The inconsistencies kept building. A transaction on a day I hadn't left the house, an updated beneficiary form I had never touched, a letter addressed to me but written with wording I would never use. Each piece alone could have been an error. Put together, they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. By the time I sat down that night to update my hidden notes, my hand was shaking, not because I felt old, but because I felt betrayed. Someone was gathering control piece by piece, and they were doing it in my name. The fear settled in when I realized the truth that had been forming quietly in the background. She wasn't just changing my routines. She was building something behind my back, something that required my signature, my identity, and my absence. And I didn't know how far she intended to go. What would you think if paperwork appeared with your name on it, but not your memory? I understood the damage she was doing the moment I heard my own name described like a problem. It happened during a routine appointment, one I thought would be simple. I had barely taken a seat when my daughter stepped in front of me and said to the doctor, "He's been forgetful and confused lately." She said it calmly, as if reporting the weather. She didn't look at me when she said it. She spoke like I wasn't even in the room. The doctor's face changed, and that shift cut deeper than anything she had said. I opened my mouth to correct her, but her hand came up lightly, almost casual, as if to guide the conversation away from me. "Dad mixes things up," she added. "It's been getting worse." She lied without hesitation, and I sat there, stunned, realizing she had rehearsed this. The rest of the appointment blurred. Questions were asked, but not to me. She answered for me. She painted a picture of a man slipping, a man losing track of days, names, and responsibilities. I wanted to interrupt, to demand she stop, but a strange pressure settled in my chest. I felt like anything I said would sound defensive, or worse, unwell. When we returned home, I tried logging into my medical portal to check what had been written. My password didn't work. I tried again, then again, locked out. No warning, no explanation. I called the office, but the receptionist told me my daughter had already updated access preferences. I asked what that meant, but the answer felt cold. "Your daughter said she would manage the account from now on." That night, she brought me another set of papers. She placed them on the table, flipping through them quickly before sliding one forward. "Just a safety form," she said. "Everyone fills these out." The top of the page looked innocent, but the language darkened as I reached the middle. Mentions of decision-making, financial oversight, authorized contacts, things no ordinary safety form needed. It looked too close to a power of attorney document to be harmless. When I hesitated, her expression tightened just for a moment. "Dad, you misunderstood," she said softly. "This is to help you." I didn't sign it. Something inside me resisted, even if I couldn't yet explain why. The next week, 2 of my medical appointments were mysteriously changed. One was moved to a date I never agreed to. Another was canceled entirely. When I asked her about it, she acted surprised. "Maybe you forgot," she said. "It happens." Those words were deliberate. They were chosen to make me doubt myself. The mail situation grew stranger too. Letters I usually received never arrived. I would see envelopes on the table that she claimed were junk, already opened. When I asked where my insurance notice was, she shrugged and said she'd take care of it, but I never saw it. Inside my own home, I started correcting myself mid-sentence, afraid any slip would become the next proof she'd repeat to someone else. I began rehearsing what I wanted to say, making sure I didn't sound uncertain, slow, or tired. It's a terrible thing, censoring yourself around your own child. But the turning point came when a neighbor mentioned my memory troubles. She said my daughter had told her I was struggling lately, and that she was doing her best to manage things. My face burned. I felt exposed. She had taken my identity, my competence, my history, and rewritten it for others. By the end of that week, I realized something terrifying. People believed her more than they believed me. And once someone else controls the story of your mind, you start to wonder how long until they control everything else. Have you ever feared someone rewriting your story while you were still alive? There are things a parent gives that never appear on paper. Years, energy, the quiet choices made late at night when no one is watching. I found myself thinking about those parts of my life more often, especially as my daughter spoke of my past like it was something to be swept aside. She called it irrelevant, as if everything that shaped her future had been nothing more than old stories I refused to let go. But her life didn't appear out of thin air. It was built one sacrifice at a time, stacked slowly, carefully, without a moment taken to explain the cost. I kept those choices quiet because I believed a child shouldn't carry the weight of a parent's struggle. I wanted her to feel safe, to grow, without worrying about how tightly I sometimes stretched each paycheck. When she was little, I worked extra shifts, 2 at times, just to keep her in the program she loved. Music lessons, school trips, better textbooks, the shoes she wanted so badly but never knew were outside my budget. I remember standing in a grocery aisle once, counting the cash in my hand and then realizing something had to be put back. I chose the food I wanted so she could have what she needed. During her college years, I took a cleaning job in the evenings. It was quiet work, the kind done after everyone else had gone home. I never told her. I didn't want the sight of her father emptying office trash bins to sit in her mind while she studied. I wanted her free of everything except her dreams. So I kept the truth to myself and let her believe the money simply came from savings. Those savings were real, but they were carved out over decades. Small amounts put aside from every bonus, every tax return, every unexpected overtime hour. I lived simply so she could live with options. I drove the same old car for years. I wore the same winter coat until the lining gave. I repaired more than I replaced. And I never said a word. I didn't tell her about the nights I stayed awake worrying if she would have the future she deserved, or the mornings I went to work sick. Because missing a day meant missing a chance to save a little more. These weren't things a father brags about. They were things done quietly, lovingly, without needing recognition. Now, when she waved my past away like dust on a shelf, something inside me shifted. She had no idea that every step she took in adulthood rested on ground I steadied for her. She talked about moving forward while dismissing the very years that made her steps firm. I don't need gratitude. I never have. But the dismissal stung, deeply, plainly. It made me realize she didn't just ignore my history, she never truly knew it. And maybe that was my fault. I thought shielding her from struggle would make her kinder. Instead, it made the years invisible. Still, remembering those sacrifices didn't weaken me. They steadied me. They reminded me that my life had purpose long before she began rewriting parts of it. What I did for her wasn't small. It was a lifetime. A foundation I built quietly, trusting it would hold her up even when she couldn't see the hands that built it. But now, as I watched her create distance and doubt around me, I understood something clearly. If I didn't protect what remained, my history, my autonomy, the legacy of my life, no one else would. She may not value the past that shaped her, but I wouldn't let her erase it. Not anymore. It started with a thin stack of papers I found wedged behind a fruit bowl on my kitchen counter. I hadn't noticed them before. Maybe she meant to take them with her. Maybe she assumed I wouldn't look. But the moment I saw my bank's name at the top, something inside me tightened. I knew I'd been uneasy for weeks, but holding those envelopes made the worry settle into something sharper. The first statement didn't look right. The dates were familiar, but the transactions felt foreign, like they belonged to someone living a different life. Transfers made early in the morning, withdrawals from a town I hadn't visited in years, and a new account name I didn't recognize. At first, I thought maybe I had forgotten something. These days, forgetting a detail felt like a dangerous accusation waiting to happen. But the amounts were too large, too frequent, too deliberate. This wasn't memory, it was intrusion. Then I saw her partner's name. It wasn't written boldly, but it was there. An attached user, a shared authorization tag, something I never would have approved. My daughter always said he helped families modernize. I never imagined modernize meant stepping into my finances without my knowledge. I spread each statement across the kitchen table, lining them up like puzzle pieces. Dates, times, account numbers, names. Everything that had felt normal before now looked suspicious. And when I reached the overlooked emails she had forgotten to clear from my laptop, the picture sharpened further. Notifications about account changes. Alerts saying, "Your profile update is complete." Messages confirming transfers I never made. Every detail pulled me back through the last few months. Each visit she made, each conversation she turned into a correction, each time she mentioned helping me stay organized. And suddenly, a pattern formed, clean and undeniable. Her visits always came the day before or the day after something moved in my accounts. Every time she criticized how I managed my home, a new change appeared in my financial record. When she brought her partner over just to check on things, the largest withdrawals happened days later. It wasn't random. It was coordinated. I sat there for nearly an hour, quietly writing down everything I saw. Times, dates, notes about her behavior, questions I couldn't answer. A part of me hoped I was making a mistake. I didn't want this to be real. I didn't want to believe the child I once carried on my shoulders could reach so deep into my life without my permission. But the numbers didn't lie. They lined up too perfectly with the changes I felt inside my own home. Finally, with my list in hand, I walked to the bank. I didn't call ahead. I didn't ask for my daughter's help. I simply took a seat in front of the manager I'd known for years. He looked at the papers, then at me, and the quiet seriousness in his eyes told me everything. He asked gentle, careful questions. Did I authorize these transfers? Did I add anyone to my account? Did I request a new profile setup? Each answer I gave was the same. No, I didn't recognize any of it. He didn't react loudly. He didn't rush. He simply nodded slowly, tapped the papers into a neat stack, and said, "I'm concerned, Mr. Turner." He explained that the activity fit patterns they were trained to watch for, patterns of exploitation, especially toward older clients. He didn't accuse my daughter directly, but the implications settled between us, heavy and real. By the time I left his office, he had already submitted the paperwork to begin a formal internal review. Something official was now in motion, even if it moved quietly. Walking home, I felt both heavier and clearer. The truth I'd tried so hard not to see had been sitting in the numbers all along, waiting for me to face it. And now that I had, there was no turning away. I laid everything on the table between us. Every printout, every date I had written down in careful handwriting, every statement she never thought I would see. I had rehearsed this moment for days, steadying myself, reminding my heart to stay quiet, even if it wanted to break open. When she walked into the living room and saw the papers arranged in neat rows, she froze, her eyes darting from the evidence to my face. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply told her I needed her to sit, to listen, and to let the truth breathe for once. She didn't sit. She crossed her arms like a shield and narrowed her eyes as if she already knew where this would go. I picked up the first statement, the one with the transfer I never approved. I explained the date, the amount, and how it linked exactly to a day she claimed she was just checking in. She shook her head before I even finished the sentence. She said I was mixing up events again, that she had explained this months ago, that I had just forgotten. Her voice was soft, almost patient, the way someone speaks to a child who keeps losing their shoes. It hurt more than anger would have. I didn't argue. I handed her the second paper, an account opened under my name with her partner listed as an authorized user. That one cracked something in her expression for just a second, a tiny flicker of panic before she swallowed it down. She told me I must have signed something without realizing it. I told her calmly that the bank verified the signatures were not mine. She told me the bank must have made a mistake. I told her the bank manager himself contacted Elder Protection Services. When I said that, she stepped back as if the floor had shifted under her. Her partner's name, printed cleanly on 3 different documents, sat between us like a confession she refused to speak. She told me I didn't understand how the world worked anymore, that people help each other by sharing access, that I was overreacting. But her voice was shaking now, each excuse thinner than the one before it. Then the knock came. 2 officials, calm and professional, handed her written notices, restrictions on accessing my accounts, warnings about continued interference, and confirmation that an investigation was active. She didn't read them. She crumpled them in her fist and glared at me as if I had betrayed her. She told them I was confused, that I had always been forgetful, that she was just trying to protect me. But the documents in front of us did not bend for her words, not this time. One of the officials spoke gently, explaining the seriousness of the findings. She interrupted him, saying I must have mixed up the dates, that she never touched my finances, that her partner only gave advice. But each statement, each signature, each timeline contradicted everything she said. The truth pressed down on her from all sides, And for the first time, she couldn't outrun it. She didn't break down. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask why I was hurt or how long I had known. She just stared at me with a coldness I had never seen in my own child. Then she grabbed her purse, told me I was choosing lies over family, and stormed out of the house as if the evidence had personally insulted her. I watched her car pull away, the taillights disappearing at the end of the street. When the officials left and the house returned to its quiet wait, one truth settled in my chest. She didn't want honesty. She wanted escape. She wanted freedom from responsibility, not reconciliation. My silence had protected her for far too long, and breaking it finally revealed who she had chosen to become. What should a parent do when the truth is denied, even with proof in hand? I learned in the months that followed the investigation that life doesn't fall apart in one loud moment. It breaks in quiet places first, in small shifts you barely notice until you're standing alone in them. When the officials stepped back and the house belonged to me again, I didn't celebrate. I simply began picking up pieces of myself I had set aside for years, one routine at a time. I started making my own breakfast again, even if it was just toast. I walked to the corner store without someone telling me it was unsafe. I sat in my living room with the curtains open, letting the sunlight fall where it wanted, not where someone decided it should. Independence at my age doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like returning to a room where the lights were turned off without asking you. You switch them on slowly, letting your eyes adjust, wondering how long you stood there in the dark. I realized something else as the days passed. The real loss didn't happen at the restaurant. It didn't happen when she told me to wait outside or when I watched her laugh behind the glass as if I were a stranger. It happened long before. It happened in the silence between her calls, in the way she looked at me when I tried to share a story, in how she spoke to others about me as if I were an inconvenience she was forced to manage. That night at the restaurant was only the moment I finally saw what had been happening for years. I started thinking about that sidewalk again, how I had stood there, watching her figure blur behind the reflection on the window, how my hands hung at my sides, unsure of what to do with themselves. I thought about how long I waited, not just that night, but throughout her adulthood, waiting for her to speak to me the way she used to, waiting for her to remember who I was before she decided who I should be, waiting for her to meet me halfway or even a quarter of the way. I was standing outside long before she told me to go there. But something changed in me after the investigators confirmed what I already feared. I stopped waiting, not out of bitterness, not out of revenge, but because waiting outside someone else's life is no way for an old man to spend whatever years he has left. I earned my stories. I earned my memories. I earned my right to speak them into the world without apology. Her dismissal cannot erase the decades that built her childhood, her education, her stability. She may choose to forget them, but forgetting doesn't take them away from me. I began writing some things down: names, dates, memories, pieces of gratitude and regret. Not because I expect her to read them, and not because I think they will one day change her heart. I wrote them so I would not lose the parts of myself that made me a father long before I became an old man she felt embarrassed by. There is strength in reclaiming what you lived through. There is dignity in refusing to let someone else narrate your life for you. And there is peace in understanding that love, even when rejected, still belongs to you. It doesn't disappear just because someone walks away without turning back. I don't know what she thinks now. I don't know if she tells herself a story where she was right, or kind, or justified. I only know that I no longer stand outside waiting for her to open a door she has already locked from the inside. I carry my love quietly now, not as a hope for her return, but as a reminder of who I was when she still looked at me with trust. What stays with you when the people you love walk away without looking back?